I helped my brother run away from his own wedding. My mom left us when I was 2. I didn't remember her ever reading to me or doing anything fun with me. My older brothers, Peter and Finch, never said anything about her at all. They were only a few years older than me, so they were also kids when mom left. As I grew older, I found out why mom left through conversations I overheard dad having with his lawyer, or mom. My mom was an extremely jealous woman and selfish. Mom was also dramatic and loved attention. She made dad lose his job thrice by going to his workplace to make a scene or accuse him of having an affair with a female boss or coworker. Dad was quiet and easygoing and tried to please her, but nothing he did could make her happy. She accused him of loving us more than he loved her, and she said he spent more time with us than he did with her. She was jealous of anyone who got close to dad, and as young as I was, she didn't like that dad bought me toys and storybooks. I found out about this from Finch after I pressured him to tell me about her. Finch said she took away the toys dad got for me and even some of the clothes he bought for us because she thought it was a waste of money. Although we were young and we never had maternal love, we still missed our mother. Finch told me that I used to cry for her, and that was why I started sleeping in their room because I couldn't sleep alone. I was afraid that when I woke up, they would have gone too. Dad tried to contact her, but she kept avoiding him until several months later when she served him divorce papers. They got shared custody, but mom often forgot to pick us up, and the few times we were at her place, she'd either be on her phone all the time or accuse us of breaking up her marriage. She said she and dad were happy before she had us. Then she married a man with 3 kids, and her new husband was just like her. He didn't like us, and whenever we were at her place, he would complain that we were spoiled and call our dad names. One day, Peter stood up for us, asking him to stop calling our dad names. He kicked us out, and a kind neighbor let us stay with her until dad came to pick us up. His children were no better. They lived with their mother, but the few times we met them, they tried to bully us. We had learned that no one could hurt us if we stood up for each other, so we didn't let them bully us. A few years later, dad met a lovely woman named Kathy. We liked her. She was sweet, warm and caring. On their wedding day, mom showed up, screaming and accusing dad of cheating on her with his wife-to-be when they were still married. She grabbed Kathy's bouquet of flowers and stomped on them. I was so frightened by mom's behavior that I started to cry. My brothers wiped off my tears and hugged me. Dad asked mom to leave, and she promised to sue. She stopped coming around to pick us up, and when dad called to ask her if she wanted him to drop us off, she said she wanted nothing to do with us, and she hung up the call. But she showed up one morning and said we should pack our bags and spend the weekend with her. Dad didn't argue with her. He let her take us along with her. That weekend, she kept telling us that our stepmother was pretending to be a good person and that she'd soon show us her true colors. A few years later, our stepmother, Kathy, slipped in the bathroom and hit her on the floor. She was in a coma for weeks, and we were so terrified that we would lose her. After school, my brothers and I visited her. We read to her and brought her flowers. Our mother didn't like that we were visiting her, so she filed for full custody, at a time when our dad was at his lowest. We were old enough to know she didn't care about us but only wanted to punish dad. After a series of court visitations, dad got full custody of us while mom got visitation rights. She was dramatic in the court, crying and wailing like she cared about us. We were at her place one night when dad called to let her know that Kathy had passed away and he'd pick us up early so we could attend the funeral. Mom didn't break the news to us. Instead, she told us she was taking us to our grandmother's to spend time with her. We didn't like our grandmother either because she was just like mom. Peter suggested we wait until morning to go to grandma's since it was miles away, but mom insisted we leave immediately. Her husband was on night shift, so she left a note for him that she had taken us to her mother's. She was happy on the way to grandma's. It was the happiest we had ever seen her. She even hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. She blasted different songs from the car stereo, singing at the top of her voice. When we got to grandma's, mom told her to pop open a bottle of wine because dad called to inform her that our stepmother had passed away. We started crying when we realized what happened, but mom opened a wine bottle and continued celebrating. Our grandmother led us to our room and told us to stay there and that she needed to talk to mom. We heard them arguing, and a few hours later, dad came for us. Grandma had called him to let him know that we were with her. Although dad got full custody of us, he left the line of communication open, only that mom never reached out, and when we did, she would make promises she wouldn't keep too, and she never celebrated our birthdays or got anything for us. When we became adults, we didn't discuss or plan it, but we stopped reaching out to her, and she never bothered to check up on us. Occasionally, she'd tag us in a Facebook post she had made to celebrate her husband or stepchildren. She didn't attend our graduations because she had planned girls' trips with her friends and didn't want to disappoint them. My oldest brother, Peter, was the first to move out of our dad's place, while my second brother, Finch, and I continued to stay at dad's. We stayed in touch and hung out every weekend, and we still shared everything as we used to as kids. My brothers still watched out for me, and when we hung out, they would ask me if I were seeing someone since I hadn't introduced them to any boys since high school. During one of the usual hangouts, Peter brought his girlfriend and introduced her to us. She was a beauty, but Finch and I were worried that Peter was going to get heartbroken by her. Peter was a sweet, kind, selfless soul. We wanted him to find a woman who would complete him. But Tracy, his girlfriend, seemed like the opposite of him. She was loud, rude to the waiters, and couldn't stop talking about herself or her family. Just before we left, she told me that Peter had told her about our childhood and how our mother abandoned us. She said she couldn't imagine not having her mother in her life. I thanked her for showing concern, but I let her know we were good and we never talked about our mother because that was our past. The next day, Peter called me, and I could hear he was upset. I asked him what happened, and he said Tracy made a Facebook post about their relationship and tagged Mom in it. When he saw it, he thought Mom had sent her a friend request, but it turned out that Tracy sent her a request because she wanted to unite Mom with us. Peter was upset and shaken because he was the oldest, and apart from Dad, he was the only one who had been there for us, especially after we lost our stepmother. He didn't get to be a child and enjoy his childhood because he had to help Dad take care of us. I told him to talk to her and explain to her why he didn't want her to make any contact with Mom anymore. Later, Finch told me he had spoken with Peter, and Tracy wasn't sorry for what she did. She said we were dramatic, didn't know the value of family, and needed to reconcile with our mother. We loved our brother and wanted him to be happy even though we didn't like his girl. So, we ensured that we saw less of her, and when he came around with her, we put up with her talks of us needing to reconcile with our mother. Tracy was like our mother. On several occasions, her mask of being the sweet girlfriend slipped. Dad started dating again, and he and his girlfriend, Lee, got serious. Peter came to spend the weekend with us, and Tracy showed up without informing him that she was coming. When she saw Lee, even though she was our dad's age, Tracy started yelling at Peter and accusing him of cheating on her. We calmed her down and told her Lee was Dad's girlfriend. She didn't apologize to Peter, she just returned to her car and left. 2 years later, they were still together, and her drama had worsened. But Peter loved her, and we believed she loved him too. Peter proposed to her, and they started planning their wedding, but Tracy didn't want to include us. She said we were from a broken family while her parents had been together for years, and she didn't want her side of the family to be embarrassed. I contacted her several times, asking her if there was anything I could help with, but she'd say, "Don't worry, Sandy, we've got everything under control." Peter invited our grandmother to the wedding, but she wanted to bring Mom as A+1, so Peter told her she was no longer welcome at his wedding. On the day of the wedding, I got to the church, and I started to panic because Mom was seated at the front pew with her husband and his children, who had been mean to us our whole lives. I called Peter because he and Finch were still at his place, and Tracy was still home. Peter was upset, but Finch took charge. He asked me not to say anything to Mom and that he would handle the situation. Peter called Tracy because he thought Mom crashed the wedding and wanted to let her know what was happening. But to his surprise, Tracy said she invited Mom to the wedding because she wouldn't marry a man who wasn't on speaking terms with his mother. I went to pick up Peter from his place, and he said I should take him to Dad's and that the wedding was cancelled. I asked him what was happening, and he said Tracy invited Mom and she wouldn't marry him unless he made up with Mom. We went to Dad's, and Peter called Finch to let him know the wedding was cancelled because he wouldn't marry Tracy if Mom were at the church. Finch handled things as best as he could. He told everyone the wedding was cancelled, but all the gifts would be returned, and he apologized for what happened. I was still trying to calm Peter down when Tracy and her family arrived. Her father threatened to sue Peter if he didn't marry his daughter, and her mother said she was ashamed of us and that we weren't brought up properly. Dad stood up for us and asked them to leave. Then Mom and her family showed up, and she said we were bad children. Her husband called Peter names and said his children were better than us. Finch and he got into a fight, but I separated them, and the three of us went to our childhood bedroom and locked the door. Tracy kept texting Peter, saying he was ungrateful and she was only trying to help bring his family together. She said it was a wedding gift, but Peter didn't know the value of family. Peter tried to be strong but became emotional when everyone left. Finch and I went out to get us some of our favorite fast food and it was like we were kids again. He cheered up after we ate, and we told him not to think of anything and to go to bed. The following day, Peter called his boss, who was at the church too, to explain everything to him, and he was given a few weeks off work. Mom made several social media posts, calling us ungrateful children, but we all blocked her. Tracy texted Peter that he owed her and her family an apology, and several days later, she said she was coming over with her family and wanted to meet with Peter. They were living together, so Tracy had all of his stuff, and she threatened to throw them away if Peter didn't agree to the meeting. On the day of the meeting, the first thing Tracy said when she arrived was that I wasn't allowed to be there. She wanted to talk to Peter alone, but he told her that she needed to apologize because she had invited our mother to the wedding when he had explained everything to her and how much she had hurt us. Tracy said she didn't owe us an apology and said we were spoiled and her family was better than ours. Dad suggested that the meeting be adjourned because Tracy was getting emotional, but she called him a terrible father. Our dad gifted them a car and a house for the wedding. He had been there for us our whole lives. Peter asked her to leave and said she had stepped out of line. He said he still loved her and wanted to marry her even though she constantly nagged him, but he wouldn't let her disrespect his family. Tracy started crying, and her family started threatening Peter all over again. Her father said Peter had to marry his daughter and that families always disagreed. At this point, Mom and her husband arrived. She started to cry, saying she missed us and wanted to be a part of our lives. Her husband said we should forgive her because she was our mother, and no one could replace her. We told him she wasn't our mother anymore. Dad asked them to leave, and she accused him of turning us against her. Mom said she would go to the local press to say that Dad was keeping her children away from her. Finch confronted her and asked her to leave. After everyone left, we thought the drama was over, but Tracy started granting interviews to the local press, claiming she was pregnant, and Peter abandoned her at the altar. Peter didn't want to say anything, but I had had enough. Mom heard us for years, and Tracy was doing the same thing to him. I granted an interview and said Tracy wasn't pregnant, and if she were, she should let our family doctor carry out a test. She stopped granting interviews after that. Peter stayed with us for a few weeks more. We watched movies, I read aloud to them, and we went on a family trip. Peter started therapy, and Finch and I went to get his things from Tracy's. She accused me of ruining her wedding. She said I was jealous of her and afraid she would take Peter away from me. She said if I hadn't told him Mom was at the church, she would have convinced him to forgive Mom when he arrived. Days later, her father called Peter to inform him that Tracy had a breakdown and it was our fault. I had a lot of guilt over what happened, but I started therapy, and it helped me to confront the truths I had been running away from. One of them was the fear of abandonment, and that was why I didn't let anyone other than my dad and brothers get close to me. Finch also started therapy, and whenever we hung out, I could see that we were all in a better place emotionally. 6 months after the drama, Finch married his high school sweetheart. 2 years later, they told us they had been on the adoption list for a while because they decided to adopt. We prayed with them and encouraged them not to lose hope. One morning, Peter's call woke me up, and when I answered it, it was a conference video call with Dad and Peter. Finch and his wife's baby had been born, and the adoption had been finalized. Dad had tears of joy in his eyes as he showed off our niece to us. Mom found out about the baby through Finch's Facebook post, and she called, demanding to see her grandchild. Finch got a restraining order against her because she wouldn't stop calling and texting him. I finally dared to leave home and got my apartment. A year later, I married an amazing man who had been my friend for years. Peter moved on with his life and had a live-in girlfriend who was a sweetheart, but we still teased him about being a runaway groom.